ado, I'd like to introduce Ray Lane. Ray is a technology executive and venture capitalist best known for leading the turnaround of Oracle Corporation in the 1990s. As Oracle's president and COO, Ray reestablished the company's leadership in the database and market and grew Oracle's market cap by 65 times to over $200 billion. After leaving Oracle, Ray became a managing partner with Kleiner Perkins for 14 years before becoming partner emeritus with the firm. And interviewing Ray will be Rich Karlgaard, the publisher and futurist at Forbes. His writing is known for its keen assessment of technology, economic, business, and leadership issues. He is a regular commentator on the Fox Business Channel, a speaker and panel moderator at business events, and a Silicon Valley investor and advisory board member. So please help me in giving a warm welcome for Ray and Rich.
So, yeah, I'll go around on the far side. Well, I'm thrilled to be having this conversation with you, Ray. We're going to, in the brief time that we're up here, touch on 3 points of Ray's career. When he came into Oracle and had to turn it around, a fast-growing, charismatically led company that grew too fast and didn't put in some proper structures. His time at Kleiner Perkins, and then most intriguingly, we're going to spend the most time at his new venture, Great Point Ventures, which is really a return to venture capital the way it was conceived in Silicon Valley in the 1970s. But briefly, Oracle, you came in. Larry Ellison, one of the protean entrepreneurs in the history of the country, fast growth company, had gone public in 1986, but...
Well, it was 1992, and Oracle had really hit a wall in 1991. Several things had happened. I was unaware of this. I was at Booz Allen in Hamilton running the information technology practice on a worldwide basis and really focused in a different world. Our practice typically dealt with CEOs that wanted to develop information technology strategies in concert with the growing role of the CIO, and database technology was not really ever an issue to the CEO. It was handled, those decisions were handled much lower level. And so when I was approached by Heidrick and Struggles to consider coming to Oracle, it was like from left field. It was like, first of all, I discovered I may have been one of the few people on the planet did not know the rise and fall of Oracle. I didn't know that story. I brushed up on it. I said, look, I really am not interested. I really see myself staying with Booz Allen and doing, other things with Booz Allen. And the recruiter said, well, why don't you just take a meeting with Larry and maybe you can sell him a consulting assignment. And that got me to fly out, and Larry and I spent 3 or 4 hours together and basically just sold each other. I mean, I knew at the end of the meeting, I was pretty jacked up on the opportunity. I think he was pretty enthused about me doing this. He always thought that Oracle was a projects business, even though they sold a product, that everywhere the database is used, their database products were used, there was a project going on. And so he liked the idea of a service guy, a projects guy leading. A lot of people had questions about whether I could actually lead a software product sales force and service organization and all of that. So,
well, not to mention working with a very strong-willed character, Larry Ellison, and getting the best out of him while getting the company in a more financial order.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I knew, I was counseled by everybody. My wife, my friends, my colleagues, my clients, not to do this. And it was largely because of the large personality that Larry had. What I saw in those 4 hours was, a person of great rationality. Just got to the point, I get to the point. We both agreed on where this industry was going, me more from a business standpoint, him more from a technology standpoint, and we agreed on a bunch of things. And like Larry has always said, anytime we disagreed, we still were slaves to rationality, to logic. And so we could disagree, but we could get to the right answer because it was so logical. But in that year, I knew I was joining a company whose stock had fallen. Basically, the market cap of Oracle was somewhere around $2 or $3 or $4 billion. The sales were about 800 flat. Sybase was the leading technology of the day. Sybase was really winning the market. Informix was growing. And so I knew that this was a turnaround. Oracle was really needed to get a better product in the market. We did not have a programmable server to compete against Sybase programmable server, and so stored procedures and triggers were not in Oracle's product in Oracle 6. So we needed to get Oracle 7 and Oracle 7.1 out the door. We had a sales force that was the most aggressive in the industry, and it basically was a free-for-all. There was no guidance to the sales force of how to work in teams, how to work for the client's long-term benefit. It was always get the job done, grow. You know, until then, between 1986 and 1992, the company had grown over 100% per year. After it went public in '86. So it's a public company where the expectations were to double every year. And it hit Q1 of 1991 and it was flat. And so it really needed a turnaround. There were no business practices. The sales force was basically taking every advantage of just short-term commission sales, and a lot of the software we were shipping was very buggy.
Well, so we leave enough time to talk about Kleiner and particularly GreatPoint, your new venture firm. How would you summarize, because there are probably many people in the audience who are founders of companies, and as they scale up and as they enjoy some success or perhaps some potholes on the road, may come to the conclusion, or their investors may come to it sooner, that they need more management skill in the company. So how does a founder and a professional manager, how do they work side by side without trying to undermine each other?
During my time at Kleiner, you know, I joined Kleiner after I left Oracle, and it made everybody I talked to the same. When I talked to people about going to Oracle, everybody said, "Don't do this. Don't leave Booz Allen and that reputation of that firm to go to Oracle." I did the same thing with Kleiner. Everybody said, "This makes so much sense because the venture industry is full of people that don't have operating experience. You actually have operating experience and can help these founders and entrepreneurs." And you know, if you look at some of the older firms in the venture industry that go back 40 years or 50 years, and some of those original founders like Eugene Kleiner and Tom Perkins, Bill Draper and Don Valentine, and you know all the people that started this industry, they didn't have any rule book for what venture was. What they were doing was finding young entrepreneurs, young founders, that they could surround with management talent, help them recruit, help them raise money, help them with customers, do the things that they knew how to do coming from their large company background. And the industry got to be so big, there's over 1,000 venture firms in the United States now. Around the world, I don't know what the number is. There's a lot of money in the industry, and it's an industry where there is not a lot of operating experience, quite frankly. And it's become, you know, at the end of the day, the venture business is a service business. It exists for one reason, to be of service to a CEO, to a founder. That's it.
And produce outsized returns for its limited partners.
Of course, but it cannot afford to be arrogant. It cannot afford to be incompetent without the right operating skills. It can't afford to not deliver returns, of which 90%, or let's just be conservative, 85% of the industry doesn't do. And so, I think many times, the thought is that you can actually start a venture capital company if you just find the money. Just if you can gather some LPs together, or you have created wealth, you can hang a shingle out and call yourself a venture capitalist. The business is much, much harder than that. And the reason it's hard is you got to look at not just the technology, just be smart in what technology trends are going to pan out, but you got to be smart about how to build a company. At the end of the day, that's what you're doing. You're building a company that both customers and investors, private and public investors, are going to place some value on. And if you lose sight of that, and you say, well, I've got the best technology, everybody's going to beat a path to my door to buy that technology, and you don't build out the company, then you've made a huge mistake.
Well, it seems, and that was a common mistake, I think, once, but it seems to me an even more common mistake is this idea that if you don't blitz scale your way to some kind of platform position in your industry, somebody else will get there first. And as a consequence of that, and you look out into the technology landscape today, and there are these giant platform companies, and everybody thinks they want to be a platform company or some sub-platform company, and they race like crazy, and the venture capitalists are telling them to race like crazy. And Reid Hoffman writes books called Blitzscale. And I mean, is that a rational response just to the way the global internet is played out? But is it a response that is luring too many entrepreneurs into this and too much money where the odds of success are going to be pretty low, but the winners are going to be huge?
No question. So if you just use the 90s, late 90s as the barometer, okay, it was a different time, no question. But if you use that time frame, you say, okay, what was the result of that? There was a lot of carnal damage. I mean, there were a lot of failed startups that thought they were going to be very successful. There were successful companies that came out of that. Google came out of it, Amazon came out of it, eBay came out of it. So there were successful companies that came out of it, but you can count them on both hands versus the thousands that were created. Today is no different. So if everybody sets the goal of saying, I have to be a unicorn, and this obsession with being a unicorn causes companies to do things that they otherwise might have done better, build a better foundation to build the business upon. I'll give you an example. I'm wearing Beyond Meat t-shirt. I was the first money in Beyond Meat. I invested back in 2011 when this founder, who was a farmer, had discovered how to take soy protein. Now he uses only pea protein and other proteins, not soy. But how to take protein powder and turn it into something that feels and tastes like meat. And it's been a long journey. But he is where he is today because he built the right foundation. He cared about supply chain. He cared about operating and manufacturing costs. He cared about the market itself. Where was the market? He cared. All those issues were ironed out 5 years ago to prepare a platform that can make him a winner today.
So it didn't.
If you don't, and there are others that say, let's just raise a lot of capital. Okay, that's what it's about. Let's raise $100 million, $500 million, and let's spend it on marketing and just tell everybody we have food, healthy food. And this gets down. At the end of the day, you're a consumer packaged goods company that makes probably thin margins, and you better figure out your supply chain and operations. And
How do you resist the temptation, though, that let's say there's some kind of media that is covering your industry, and they put out a list of the highest valued private companies in this particular sector, and you're doing all the right things, and suddenly you find out you're ranked number 5. Now you've got leadership, but there are other companies out there that have a higher valuation. How do you resist the pressure?
It's your choice. As a CEO, it's your choice to play for the short term or the long term.
But the investors are going to have their say too.
No, that's all about dilution. So if you say I'd be better off taking dumb money at $1.5 billion valuation rather than taking smarter money at $500,000 and take more dilution, it is, am I playing for the longer term? Valuation is a temporal issue. I mean, I don't know of anybody that kind of just goes to, other than those ones I mentioned, Google, Amazon, but the core of this industry, the core startup industry, do not produce a value that just continues to go north and north and north. And success is not valuation. Success is customers seeing what I call primal demand, that the potential customers see such a benefit in buying your product that they will create wind in your sails. It will be a pull rather than a push. A lot of enterprise tech companies I see today, total push. Let's go hire a sales force and push this into the marketplace because we know that technology is needed. Okay, and it's a very expensive proposition to hire a sales force and go out there and create the demand. But if you can somehow build the, first, we spend time at Great Point Ventures. I'll just take a moment to, I would say at Kleiner and most Sand Hill Road venture firms, you're kind of put in a position to evaluate the technology. There are so many founders that come in and say, I have discovered a better mousetrap. I have, I found a hole in a certain technology, or either, cloud or, robotics or whatever the technology today has produced an opportunity, and that opportunity will get funded. It may not get funded by Sequoia, but it gets funded by somebody. There's just too much money out there to not get funded if you present an incremental technology story. We thought at Great Point Ventures, turn that around and say technology is really a commodity. Every founder starting today has the same technology available to them. There's about a dozen of them. If you start with robotics and AI and machine learning, you move into digital healthcare and you say, I got CRISPR technology and I've got genomic research. I've got all sorts of technologies available to me. Now, the quality of that technology might be different based on team, but the first step is how big is the market? What are you trying to do? What pain point or what problem are you trying to solve? And go out and test in that market that you're going to find enough people who will pay you enough money to solve that problem. So is your market big enough? Because you start with a small market, you're screwed. Doesn't matter how good your technology is. You got to have a big market, and you got to understand what the economic parameters are for buying your product.
Well, B2B works that way, but B2C doesn't always work that way.
Doesn't always work, but
Yeah.
you can test that as well. You
Yeah.
maybe you might have to go out and do a live test for eyeballs. Absolutely. But the most important, if I take all that, I'm asked a lot. Okay, Ray, the winners and the losers. What made the difference? And I would say one thing. Out of all the factors, you could put into one thing, and that was who was leading the company. 80% of the reason for success is who leads it. Not the technology, not even the size of the market, not 1,000 other factors ago, it's who leads it. 80% of what we see coming through the doors are founders. So they come in and say, I have invented something new, I have a deep domain expertise in an industry or in a technology, and I've found a hole. I found an improvement, a benefit for customers to buy. And that could be in healthcare, it could be in consumer, it could be in enterprise. And they forget immediately that they are a founder with a technology background. They never had CEO training. So somewhere along those lines, of course, they start off day one saying, I'm a CEO. Okay? And some of them stay that. Larry Ellison never had training as a CEO. He used to tell me, I don't even know what a CEO does. Ray, do you want to be CEO? Because I don't know what a CEO does. He was serious too. I know what a product developer does. And that's where we create differentiation. He said, Ray, he owned about 15% of the headcount, but 80% of the rationale of why we were successful. He says, I can make or break the company. You can hurt it or help it. But with the product, and he says, I understand how to do that. And most founders understand how to do that. But along the way, there has to be an investment in that founder to become a CEO, to become an entrepreneur first. And I think there's a difference. Entrepreneurs know how to raise money, know how to recruit a team, know how to be compelling in their argument to a customer. They know how to pivot a company if it's not working, not cling to what they started with and say, you know, everybody else is wrong, I'm right, I know this is right. They pivot the company. Tom Siebel has pivoted C3 4 times, okay? He'll find a market because he's a good entrepreneur. And then what's a CEO? At Beyond Meat, again, this Ethan Brown was a farmer, and we've turned him into a public company CEO.
Well, this brings us to this enormously important thing called coaching. And I think those of us who've been around Silicon Valley for a long time, we all lamented the passing of Bill Campbell a few years ago, and we all were overjoyed when Eric Schmidt and Jonathan Rosenberg wrote a book called The $1 Trillion Coach, bringing Bill Campbell to life. Very interesting that you and Bill Campbell both grew up in the Pittsburgh area. He was a little bit older than you, but talk about what Campbell meant to so many entrepreneurs and how you are doing the same thing at Great Point.
Yeah, but I admire Bill so much. He coached my daughter in powder puff football, and so my kids both at Sacred Heart High School, and so I go way back to Bill. We've drank beer together in Pittsburgh. He comes from the east side of Pittsburgh, where all the steel mills were, in Homestead. I still say Steelers. So I admire Bill a lot, and think I've patterned a lot of what I do the same way. And maybe it's you come up with a Midwest background.
Yeah. How would you boil down what that magic thing is? I mean, here you read Eric Schmidt's book, if you weren't familiar with Bill Campbell, that CEOs from Brad Smith at Intuit to Eric Schmidt at Google to on and on they went. They would drive into the lesser known part of Palo Alto on California Avenue, and where he had kept a obscure little office, and they'd wait outside, and it was like they were going to a therapist. And what magic did he impart on them?
I don't think it was anything that is not known to most human beings that were raised in good families and had basic business education. I think it's Bill's personality. It was Bill's personality to basically, first of all, you let down when you met Bill, you just immediately say, okay, I'm not the smartest guy in the room anymore. I'm going to let down all my inhibitions. If let's say in the first 2 minutes you try to prove how smart you are, he will tell you, stop being so fucking smart. Okay, I mean, literally, he swore like a sailor. And he'd just like put you in your place and say, I'm sorry, I'm wasting my time if what you're going to do is talk about how smart you are about cloud storage or whatever it is. I'm here to tell you that you've got to get your mind wrapped around you're building a company, okay? I'll tell you one story I tell a lot is the number of entrepreneurs, founders that come in to make a presentation to get capital from Great Point Ventures. We get to the end of and I always ask them, my partners ask the same question, do you have any questions of us? And you can see it immediately, panic in their faces. Oh, I haven't thought of any questions to ask them. You are selecting a board member. You're building a board for your company. If all you're doing is getting capital, branded capital from Sequoia or Andreessen, that's expensive. That's the most expensive capital you ever raise. You need to get a lot more for it. And so you need to interview the venture capitalists. It's a level playing field. And in fact, by the way, the harder you are on the venture firm, the more impressed they'll be with you. So just don't go in and say, what's the process to get money out of you guys? That's kind of the question, the first question that comes out. What's the process? And but you are building a board, and after 2 or 3 rounds, you will have a board that is comprised of venture capitalists. And maybe that board doesn't have a lot of operating experience on it. These are partners of firms who have invested in about 40 companies just like yours and can afford to lose all the money they put in your company. Think about it. Because They don't want to, but they're diversified, okay? And if you are not performing, fine, and we just, change CEOs, or that arbitrage, we know 5 companies out of the 40 will make the whole fund, maybe 10. So you want to make sure that venture capitalist has an operating background that can actually help you. How will you help me get customers? When it comes time to raise capital, will you help me raise capital? Will you get on a plane and go raise capital with me? Will you call on can you go to a customer and tell them why they think that this company is so differentiated? It gets down to a very few people that can do that in the venture industry, and that's the kind of board you want to build. Everybody says, well, we'll just reserve that for the independent board member. And the independent board member actually doesn't do those kind of things. They may provide some operating expertise, but they won't get on planes and make customer calls and all. So that's being a service firm, and that's, you mentioned early, we built Great Point Ventures to do that, to essentially be old school. So whatever that entrepreneur asks, we've got a company that I just said, right on the spot, I said, we're going to fund you. Give them some seed funding, $2 million. We're going to fund you. And yesterday we were in a strategy session, and I've already developed what the targets are going to be on this thing. And it's just, that is the fun of being in this business. It's not distributing capital.
Well, thank you so much, Ray Lane. This has been really great.
Thank you.
I'm sitting on stage, so.
Thank you so much, you guys. We would like to invite our Startup World Cup chairman, Anis Uzman, to the stage to give gifts of appreciation for both Ray and Rich.
Great.
Thank you. Present from us.
My wife will be happy.
I'm heading to Pittsburgh. I don't
Thank you, thank you.
Take a picture with you guys.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Come on over in the front.
Okay.
Hold that, hold that, hold that.
Oh, hold it.
So I'm getting on a plane to Pittsburgh. I'm going to say, okay. All right, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.